All right, we are back. Hello, everyone, and hello to Fred in jolly old England.
Hello.
He's a plumber. Um, um,
How the hell did you know that stereotype of the Polish
I
plumber?
watch BBC stuff and even non-BBC stuff, so yes, I know that stereotype.
That's very,
Uh, we
that's
would we would never propagate stereotypes on this channel.
hello.
Yeah,
Hello.
yeah.
I have
Um,
two words. Anyway, sorry, carry on.
you're good. We're back to talk. It's at least over here in the colonies. It is early. It's the beginning of spooky season. Spooky season begins early for some of us. And since we had already established that Fred comes on to talk about a host of things, but one of which would be British ghost stories, I he was so kind as to return and do a little bit of reading. We appreciate that, and hopefully he enjoyed that reading. I think it's enjoyable. We're talking about Charles Dickens today. And Charles Dickens is known for many different works, also known for ghost stories. Probably arguably one of the most popular ghost stories in the English language, which is A Christmas Carol. It probably is one of the most, I would say.
Yeah.
Um, Everyone thinks of Christmas Carol. It's a great book. We should actually do Christmas Carol for Christmas time if you're interested. It is a good book.
That would,
Um,
yes.
yeah.
It's
Um,
one of these stories that because admittedly, I do not actually know very much about the kind of gothic horror canon as much as you do. You are, explaining my culture to me. Um, but so yeah, a lot of the
Sit
time I
down, sit your Brit ass down because an American is talking. All right, yeah.
I've had to read these things, for my own accord before saying to you. But I had I have done the signalman before.
Oh, you
I
have? Okay.
not I did have to familiarize myself with it. The Because it's quite a difficult story to understand the point of, the themes of, or maybe it doesn't. Maybe it's not one supposed to have such a point, but it obviously, although it's Dickens, so there is always something in it. There's always some, you
Yeah.
know, some issue or some real life event, which this one allegedly is related to a real train crash that
Yeah.
happened,
Which is
including
sorry. So
include
which is to say,
yeah
sorry, so he Dickens most known probably for A Christmas Carol, but we're actually talking about the Signalman today, which I think is actually in some ways a better, not a better story, but a better ghost story. It functions better as a spooky ghost story, and I think it doesn't have
it,
the resolution that Christmas Carol gives you. It kind of has no resolution, and
yeah
I do
yeah
think I do think unlike I think I would argue Christmas Carol is really more of like an ethical, it's about ethics and morality, and there's some sort of like there's kind of a message or like to the audience, there's like a call to action. It is actually very religious in many respects.
yeah.
This
It's
story
fantasy.
is more, I think, about, I mean, well, we'll get into that. I really think that this story, and then also particularly the wonderful BBC adaptation, is kind of just commenting on what's happening in England at the time and not giving you answers. It's just commenting on sort of like what, for lack of a better term, modernity does to people and landscapes, something like that. That's kind of what I got from it. But yeah.
It gives these very vivid portrayals of the sort of psychological struggles of this man, and maybe there's some implication about like class divisions between the narrator and the signalman. I literally just thought of that off the top of my head. Maybe there's something in that. I mean, Dickens wasn't like a communist or anything, but he did do these vivid portrayals of different classes and stuff. And uh, yeah, and also just what I was going to say before, yeah, Christmas Carol is another story I do also have a lot of familiarity with without having to come on this show. So that would be something I'm perfectly willing to go into.
Cool.
I listen to it I listen to it every year with my family because there's a very good Martin Jarvis reading of it.
Oh, I like the Tim Curry one. So
Martin Jarvis is what is my favorite, if not just the best audiobook reader there ever was. And the main thing he's known for is a children's book series called Just William, which are the best children's books ever written. Anyway, off topic a bit. Um, Back to the signalman. Yeah, I had done this in school, but even as a kid, it is quite difficult to kind of understand the point of it, and maybe it doesn't have to have such a strong point. It is more vague what the point is of this one, but it is just generally as a kid, I think it's difficult to kind of understand because it's a short story and it has a very sort of inconclusive ending, a very abrupt ending for a short story. Although maybe short stories are more likely to have abrupt endings than longer ones, but
I would
yeah,
say, in my experience, short British ghost stories, at
yeah,
least comparing, I mean, well, like drawing from writers like Lefanu and M.R. James, yeah, you're more likely to get. I think there's something of a trope within British ghost stories of having a zingy, unsatisfying ending because it's designed to be an uncanny tale of the supernatural and the unexplainable. So you don't want to tie it up too nicely at the end, right? That would be kind of defeat the purpose of what the story is. I think that's just part of it is you want
sure.
it to stick with people. And if, you know, Christmas Carol is designed to stick with people in terms of like a story of repentance and changing your ways, then this kind of a story is designed to stick with you in like a what the hell really happened and what really was going on. And there's not an explanation. If we like, do you want to just give so spoilers abound? Do read it and or watch the BBC rather the BBC film adaptation. Very good. I like it.
I,
They're very faithful to the story.
I would just like to quickly point out this, yeah, this adaptation from 1976, sometime in the 70s, was done by Andrew Davis, who also did a very good Dickens adaptation of Bleak House in 2005, starring Gillian Anderson in the best thing she's ever been in my opinion, and some other just very good, an early role.
That's I'm sorry, that's Scully. You're put some respect on her name. Her best thing she's ever been in is X-Files.
Well, you haven't seen this yet, have you?
I don't care.
She played no, no,
X-Files. No,
it doesn't compare. Um,
X-Files.
Andrew Davis is a very good adapter TV, especially of Dickens, and he this fantastic adaptation of Bleak House he did in 2005. Go and watch it. But of course, he did this one for The Signalman, which I also watched literally just today. Not I don't think I watched it for the first time, but I was refreshing myself anyway because I've not sort of covered the story personally in a while. But yeah, I watched that just today, and it is very well acted, very well produced. Because it it's has some quirkiness about it. It's got those sort of 70s sound effects that make it sound a bit like an episode of Doctor Who.
Yeah.
It makes it sound like a sci-fi film just because the effects are a little bit cheap.
Well, there's a thing that it has too. It has that, well, from our perspective, I don't want to say cheap looking. It has a very archaic video quality to it,
Yeah.
which really works in its favor because it's so dark. And so because the exposure, I'm assuming with the film, they shot it in England, so in a dreary part of the year, and so it's like, and it's not like movie quality per se, but
Mm,
it's dark, but that actually totally fits, right? It's a dark, grim kind of story, and so I actually think a lot of those BBC ghost stories for Christmas adaptations work better because of their technological and budgetary limitations. They actually are better because if they were too good, I mean, this was an issue if you want to think about a more recent version of that with the Radcliffe Woman in Black, the Radcliffe Hines adaptation, which is good, but and they worked really hard to make it look dreary, but they're shooting it in HD, and it's like you can only get so
yeah,
dreary with HD. Like it's too clear. What's
yeah,
the picture quality is just too clean.
that's
Um,
true. There have been some effects with HD in ways that people don't acknowledge enough. You know, um, I mean that's another topic, but yeah, I know what you mean. And this adaptation also is just there's really some really sort of artsy things in it, like some sort of art house film stuff in it.
mhm.
There's the towards the end there's the bit with the concluding drama where the signalman is on the track and the train's approaching and there's all these different shots that are it's all a bit disjointed, and then there's just these random cutaways to like uh it's like filming a cast of someone's face screaming. there's
Yeah.
just there's just this clip of like a white plaster cast of someone's face with their mouth open in terror, and it just sort of cuts to that for a bit, and yeah, it's sort of arts.
Iconic. It's an iconic image. Actually, if you buy all of the BBC Ghost Stories for Christmas on Blu-ray, I
Mm,
think that is actually the image on the cover of the Blu-ray set. So, yeah.
movie.
Should we give
Yeah,
just a brief overview of the story?
sure.
Yeah. So again, read it, watch it. We're gonna get into it. So that's a big surprise. It's a story about a signal man, a signalman. A signalman's job is to ensure that trains are moving appropriately in the correct direction on the correct track so you do not get accidents. It's near a tunnel, a train tunnel that has literally been blasted through the beautiful British countryside. Um, a dark, oozier and wetter. It's a great, yeah, it's oozier and wetter on the inside. Very kind of a evocative way that Dickens describes it. Um, it's sort of the cut, the tunnel that goes through. So you obviously don't want to have a train accident. And so spoiler, there's something of a train accident. There's multiple accidents. So you have somebody whose sole job it is. Now, I'm not an expert in trains. I'm not that kind of an autistic person. I'm a different kind of an autistic person. And I'm not an expert on historical train setups in England. But my understanding is that you have like this guy's job is to just stay there for like months on end, it seems like. And his job is to receive telegraphic messages, relaying when trains are passing through this tunnel, um, and like what direction, I'm guessing, because I'm assuming that the track runs both ways, I'm gonna guess. I don't know enough about trains in this time period. Was this 1840s, I want to say? Um,
I don't think. Well, I don't know for sure. I mean, in the adaptation, it's just one line, but it would maybe more something to do with train. When there's tracks with one line, they might join onto another or something, or maybe.
yeah,
But there'll be things that are matters of life and death if something goes wrong.
1866 is when this was published. So yeah.
Yeah,
But it's his job to it's his job to signal to not just back to whatever off main office, rail office, saying this train has passed through at this time, the track is now clear. It's also his job to, in worst case scenarios, warn the engineers on the trains that like he's there to sort of the color flag system again, which I don't really understand historically how that worked, but to like there's a code that he's working with. He's working with sort of a semiotic code to let train operators and then the train office know who's passed through at which time and whether they made it on time, and then if you need to switch over and all these kinds of things, which still is part of train systems today. Um, Again, as an American on the West Coast, we think of trains primarily as just like carrying freight. We don't really have passenger trains here. If you're on the East Coast of the US, passenger trains are more of a thing. Obviously, if you're in Europe, they're way more of a thing. Um, but so that's his job. He says this like weird, lonely little life. But it's not like and he has all this time to like learn languages and try to get better at math, but he never really succeeded at math. I felt for him on that. I've never been good with figures myself. Um, so it's like he has in some ways it's time to himself to think, to learn, to try to do something productive, but then at the same time he has like it seems like at any point he could be called back to his little office, his little booth thing, his little hut, and then to relay important messages back or receive important messages. So it's this weird thing of where he's kind of always working but rarely working, but when he's working he's absolutely necessary because otherwise people will die. So there's this kind of like high stakes job, but it's not like a trauma surgeon. It's not like every day I'm going to be dealing with severe injuries. It's like most of the time it's fine. Most of the time I get little dings and wings on the system, and I send back other dings and wings and telegraph thing, and then I put up a flag and it's okay. But if you make one error, there can be dire consequences. So it's this strange, I mean, in many ways, I think the story is about anxiety-filled jobs, like jobs that are really kind of a lot's placed on one person to make the correct decision. And this is actually just striking me right now is the story is published in 1866, referencing what seems to have been referencing a real life train accident in
yeah.
1860. Oh, the Clayton
There,
Tunnel crash rather in 1861. Um, This
there
is
was,
kind of a story
there was
potentially about competency. And we're having, I mean, in the US, we're having a severe competency crisis with things like public transportation. So, if you're like scoffing at us discussing this, I really think that this story is kind of a stand-in for like discussing how humans deal with modernity and modern systems, modern technology, like a locomotive, like any sort of large machine, and sort of the dangers that go along with organizing humans around large machines. And so, yeah, there's,
this
sorry, go ahead.
there was well there was also there was a crash sort of soon prior to the story, and also Charles Dickens himself had been in a derailment, which he
Oh, I
had
didn't know that.
not a crash, but a derailment of some kind, some sort of train calamity that he'd survived. So this sort of stuff was fresh in my mind, and Dickens was quite Dickens was quite personal in his writing in terms of he often wrote about things that had been bad in his personal experience, as well as things that he sort of saw bad at large, most especially lawyers, of course, and the way they treated debtors.
Shakespeare had things to say about lawyers too. So.
There were lawyers in this story, which is quite interesting. He gives them a bit of a break here, but yeah, and yeah, it's interesting to think that the trains were still this big thing, and there's no other way to know the safest way to operate trains just by trial and error. I guess it's more of a question of what scope do you allow the trial and error to happen with minimal hurt to real humans. I
Yeah.
suppose it's, back then they didn't think to keep the trial and error until they tended to let the trial and error happen a bit later on with real passengers. But maybe they hadn't. But if they but it's difficult to do trial and error when you're not completely simulating real situations. Anyway,
Yeah.
um, but there was still nevertheless anxiety, and this was before these ridiculous progressive political panopticons where there's all this health and safety nonsense, which is just you know just just stifling innovation more so than you're actually helping people survive. But anyway, um,
Yeah.
yeah,
So,
it's difficult for us now to sort of comprehend the anxiety of this kind of technology, because obviously there's anxiety now about like AI, but that's all very just data stuff. There's more anxiety about very abstract technological concepts, whereas we're perfectly willing to get on trains and go on planes and this, that, and the other.
although, like I said, with competency, at least in the US, with competency crisis issues, particularly with planes, because we're so
Yes,
dependent upon planes in this country.
very
Um,
recently there's been these
yeah,
wheels falling off and stuff.
literally wheels falling off. Um,
Reason I don't think we're allowed, if we say we will get taken off YouTube.
will we? I don't really care. So that's sort of the setup of the story. The narrator, who I think you're quite right in pointing out, is probably of a much higher or at least one rung higher social class. I don't. It's sort of he seems to be a more of a gentleman or gentleman adjacent kind of figure. He
He'll be of a more educated class, and not
Yeah,
that the man is like a working class person with little education, because he's trying to he has himself an interest for algebra and this
yeah,
and so it's not as if he's probably middle to lower middle class or something,
yeah.
but there's something about a kind of different just different world, different languages spoken maybe. But I don't think, when I've been sort of looking up the most conventional themes that people think of the story, that's not one of them that comes out much, which I'm surprising, because people like to project class dynamics into every story they can possibly think of. They like to, every film they think, oh, this is about communism, blah blah blah, and they've somehow not managed to do that with the Signalman yet.
Yeah,
But
not yet.
yeah,
So so this the narrator starts out by saying hello down there and or calling out to the signalman. And the signalman really doesn't respond, and it seems like the signalman is not believing that the narrator is real. And so as they get to know each other, it turns out that the signalman, while doing all of the signals correctly and preventing train accidents, has been receiving sort of like ghostly apparition visions of a figures calling out and saying, be like calling out, trying to warn him for some sort of calamity that could be happening, that theoretically will be happening. So these sort of like you've and this is pretty common in world mythologies, particularly in or world folklore, particularly in England. You have various well, let's say the British Isles in general. You have these various regions would have like spirits who are essentially give omens of doom. I mean, it's not an English example, but it's an Irish example. Banshee is sort of like the spirit or banshee. So you'd probably say in America is the spirit that calls out when you're fated to die. And so if you hear the cry of the banshee, it means that you're going to die. Like it sort of like presages a great calamity for you. So this is interesting here. I don't know again how much and I know that various other regions of the British Isles have their own versions of that kind of a spirit. It's pretty common worldwide in folklore to have some sort of death spirit that comes and says that spooks you before something bad will happen or before you die. I mean, Dickens was a smart guy. I'm assuming he probably was aware of this trope in various British folklore, and so I mean, I don't know if he's drawing on that explicitly, but it's cool that he's taking that idea of a warning spirit and placing it in the middle of a very complex high tech, which for them is high tech. Really kind of it's a cybernetic system that the signal man's operating into, right? Because there's a system of the system looks in upon itself, right? By necessity. He, as a signalman, has to know what the messages from the rail office are telling him about train movements. He then has to relay those he has to respond to those messages to the rail office, but also to the engineers as well who operate the engine and the entire train. And so there's this like the system is looking back in on itself. So it's essentially a cybernetic system. Now it doesn't use I guess it uses a little bit of electricity in the telegraph, right? But primarily it's a coal powered early industrial or middle industrial revolution kind of system. It's steam powered, it's coal powered. You don't have little smartphones, but he is plugged into a system that is sort of continually observing itself and from various angles, right? He's observing the trains, he's observing the messages from rail office. Rail office is giving his messages, and then theoretically seeing those trains as they maybe when they return to the office or to that station, however it's working, right? So it's a cybernetic network. It is essentially really kind of a precursor of what we now think of as the internet. That was something that struck me is like this is just like one of the earliest versions of that. Now, obviously, those systems predate the modern era, but it's
Mm.
being sped up by the speed of steam engines because this is fast. Like to be able to go 40 miles an hour is very fast in the 1860s. That's fast. That's incredibly fast. And to move a large amount of people or goods at 40 miles an hour, I believe that was like sort of one of the resting speeds, wasn't it? It was like 40, something like that. I think depending on the turns and stuff like it was like something like 40 was like the considered a pretty fast rate of speed for trains. In this time period, I remember reading that somewhere. So it's very fast. So like physically you can move quickly, but then also you can theoretically, assuming the signalman's not dilly-dallying or talking to spirits, assuming he's in his office at the right time, he's getting messages directly sent to him at the speed of light via telegraph wire. Um, so this is a story I think, largely about like sort of speed as cutting down time and what happens to people, in this case, a signalman, when you're continually in a situation where you always have to be on. It's like he's always needs to be there. He always needs to be awake at a certain time to make sure that he's able to relay messages. Um, it puts him in a state of like perpetual anxiety, it seems like. And then on top of that, right, there could be no supernatural anything. That would be sort of like I just kept thinking, this poor man, right? Then
Is
on top of that, Dickens adds like specters of the past, right? Who these spirits, this kind of spirit that would warn you of some calamity, but wouldn't necessarily let you know what the calamity is going to be, and adds that on top of it. Meanwhile, all the while set near a tunnel when a train is like quite literally blasting through the British countryside, like breaking the land apart, awakening maybe something from the land, who then is coming and plaguing this poor signalman who already has to deal with all this other stuff he has to do. It's just this it's a great story, but yeah, it actually kind of like it makes you feel anxious this story, at least for me, because when you think about the implications of all the things that this poor guy has to deal with,
Mm.
and the mistakes, and if he makes a mistake, it's not like, oh, we didn't file our TPS reports, right? If you're a fan of Office Space, it's not like we didn't just get the TPS reports. And it's like somebody could die, an entire train worth of people could die if you don't do this right.
There's no bureaucracy to soften the blow.
No, it's your fault.
Also,
You're screwed.
he's also just lonely, and there's not really any other way for him to. I
So
don't. I don't know.
he's
I don't know if train operations were 24 hours back then, but other than that, he just is a very lonely person.
Well, and he's by himself, and he
Yeah,
has to keep track of the time. He's by himself, but it's not like come back whenever. He's not some hermit in a monastery somewhere contemplating like something right bigger than himself. He's by himself away from people, but continually plugged into systems that people depend on, but he's isolated from them.
mm,
And so he's siloed in his little, I mean, like it's not hard for me to think of this as like a proto cubicle, right? Like he's
yes,
continually connected, but never actually, hardly ever seen anybody. And the fact that the narrator takes an interest in him is like bizarre to him because you actually, it seems like you actually want to like learn about what I do here. Well, I'll tell you, but that's just kind of strange. There's like an incredulity, like, how could you, what? Because
sure,
his whole job is people not caring about him, only caring about him switching the board and it's saying that in the right message at the right time. Like that's his job. It's just that's it. That's what people care about. They only care about what he does, not about him. Somebody actually takes an interest in him. Um,
sure.
this is the
That's
dehumanization, right? Like this is the I mean, and this is not like some high level literary theory to throw this out. Dehumanization, right? And what that does to you. You're literally not treated as a human. You're treated as a cog in an information machine that determines how gigantic machines move about the countryside. That's who you are. This is like this is I don't see much difference from somebody like the signalman to somebody like I've already referenced it, like in Office Space, not knowing why do I need to do this TPS report at this time? Like, well, it matters, but why does it matter? And no one can really tell you, right? Then to connect that to I mean, if you're anyone who works online or works from home,
I think he's more.
it's how
I
different is that
think
really? I mean, in some ways it's very different, but in some ways it's the same kind. We're just it's ours dial gets dialed up to 11. Oh, mine goes to 11. It's just higher versions of that now, of just more
I
alienation, more you're more dependent upon the electrical gadget to even do your job. Because even in the 1860s, if he doesn't have access to if the telegraph wire goes down, and that would sometimes happen, telegraph wires get knocked down or something like that, or if you're in a war zone, they get purposely knocked down. Now trains can't communicate. You don't know if the track's clear. You don't know if the tunnel's clear, right? You don't have any of that information, and you're barreling on at 40 miles an hour, and it takes you a long time to stop. So, like,
don't know if
yeah,
when the Railway Children was written. Oh no, it was written in the 20th century because it was set in the 1900s. Um, that's probably that's a much more romantic counterpart to this. Even though I don't know if you're familiar with the Railway
no,
Children,
I'm not. Yeah,
it's a similar story where it's about trains and it's more romantically portrayed about trains and childlike wonder about trains. But then there are tragedies that, or near tragedies that happen. Nothing brutal, but yeah. Sorry, that just came to mind. I don't. I don't think it's exactly like. I can understand where you're coming from with the whole it being like sort of work cubicle workers today, but I do think that his job does have a more like definable purpose. I don't think I would find him saying things like why am I doing this? Why am I doing this?
right. But
I
well, let me clarify. Of
yeah,
course, he knows what can go wrong if he
yeah,
fucks up.
yeah,
But I guess my point is we are just getting our jobs by and large, at least in the West, are more like his job than you think about it. The difference is that you don't know what role you really play in that system. So
sure.
in some ways, as bad as his job is, he understands the importance of doing it correctly.
Yeah,
We have the sort of the overall characteristics. The characteristics of our jobs are very similar, but we don't have any connection to their actual importance. But the anxiety that he feels, we also have, but we cannot connect. This is just for me, I'll speak personally. I can't connect it back to a distinct life or death necessity. And so it feels fake. but I still have to do it. And I know, and other people depend on me doing it correctly. This is, I guess, speaking personally, because some of the stuff I do, while I would have some in-person position, I work a completely different type of job too that's online. One of which where I've never actually seen my coworkers. I don't know what they look like,
Mm.
but I only know them via text, via like emails. So I'm
Mm.
working and getting paid at a job where I don't even know who these people are. So I can kind of also feel so, but I don't, it's not a life or death position, thankfully. But this poor signalman, I mean, does he met everyone at the rail office? Probably not. And they're just sending telegraphs. Those are expensive to send. So it's very curt, short, and it's all mostly in code. It's just encoded. He's not having like, please send $20. Stop. It's not like that. It's like, it's just these like signals he's getting. And he has to interpret the signals and send back signals. Somebody probably theoretically a person is sending that signal, but he doesn't know who that person is. He'll probably never meet them. The rub, or that on top of that, he then starts getting ghostly signals that only he can hear, and he can hear that they're different from the signals sent by humans. But something else is interfering in his electronic communications system that is sending him other kinds of signals that portend calamity. He's also seeing apparitions at the mouth of the tunnel. Um, and so it begs the question, at least for me, I mean, it's established in the story that the signalman can tell the difference between a human sent signal and a ghostly sent signal. But what's the difference in the end? Because he doesn't even know the humans sending him those signals. He just receives signals. It's just code he's getting. It's like
Mm.
utter, it really is just like the utter dehumanization of communication. Communication is happening. It's absolutely necessary you do it correctly, but it's not even language per se. It's just bings and bells that you have to interpret properly. And this is actually very nicely done in the BBC adaptation, because it's just this like,
Yeah.
it's actual bell system of you're like, this is banana. This was a kind of job that people actually did. Like, make sure you understand the bells properly, otherwise people will die. No pressure. I guess what I'm trying to say is now we just have a make sure you send the TPS report, otherwise who knows what happens. But you'll feel completely alienated. You have no sense of working together with humans. You're just working together with a human on the other end of a computer somewhere. But really, I think about this a lot. If for at least from one of these positions I do, where it's just mostly written, if that person was swapped out by an AI, would I know the difference? And the answer is probably no. I probably literally wouldn't. I'm not. My Turing test would say I can't tell the difference, right? That must just be a person that I'm talking to. Is it a person I'm talking to? If it were switched out, would I know? Probably not. Which is that for me, that's incredibly that freaks me out, right?
Sure.
it,
I
it's
don't.
not like it's not like, well, a human would have had to say this. It's like a computer could have said this and probably done it more efficiently and probably done it more effective. I probably would have less frustration because the AI would be able to be, it's getting so good, it probably would be clearer and more concise. um it's a weird thing. Maybe
Well,
again, I'm overly taking an overly autobiographical stance on this, but I just
I,
every time I
it,
read this story, I feel for the signalman because I'm like, this is insane. This kind of job is
well,
insane.
well, I think people would feel him for for the stuff from the outset that are sympathetic, like the fact that he's lonely or he is, suffering from mental instability because of his job or because he's seeing these apparitions. Um, in terms of taking this all to thinking about like AI and you know robotics, I maybe that might clash a bit with this idea that the story talks about having, like with a lot of other gothic horrors, there are people that want to find logical explanations for things rather than you know um the belief in something supernatural, which, as you know, that was in some of the James stories.
Yeah.
uh, we should get to at some point. um but yeah, I suppose that might be getting a little too logical on that front. I
Well,
yeah.
well, I mean, also too, if I can, it's a story about. So the narrator never sees any of these ghostly apparitions. This is just something that the signalman tells him about. And big spoiler. I mean, in the end, the signalman ends up dying
Hmm.
because one of the apparitions he saw was somebody, for God's sake, like, God, for God's sake, get out of the way. And so he's like, that just this is this apparition I keep having. It's a warning about what's going to happen. And so when at the end, uh, he hears and sees someone saying, "For God's sake, get out of the way." It's actually the train engineer trying to get the signalman to get out of the way, but he doesn't recognize it as a real person saying that because he's seen the specters so many times. He doesn't trust his eyes and ears anymore. He thinks it's a ghostly apparition, does not get out of the way, and is killed. So in a way, it's like he's seen an apparition, and and maybe the apparition is not false in the sense that it's not going to happen, but by seeing that, he actually is killed. And this, I think, is I think I can make this argument. I think Dickens is harkening back to pre-modern storytelling tropes. I'm thinking particularly like Greek tragedy of, you know, the prophecy about you, therefore you will follow all of the mistakes in order to prevent the prophecy from you happening, and then you will be dead. And it's like it is like a self-fulfilling prophecy.
He
Yeah.
probably doesn't. He probably doesn't. Well, the in this before he dies, he's talking to the narrator, and he said, "I've seen the apparition again, but it's before a tragic event has happened." And so maybe he didn't think that such a tragic event would happen to him. It's only to other people.
Right.
So maybe he hasn't. So it's also the fact he might not have either clocked onto the fact that the bad thing might happen to him as opposed to other people, or he hasn't clocked on the fact that he's seeing something that is a real person warning him to get out of the way.
Right.
Which, yeah, lends itself to this. I mean, back then maybe there was anxiety about automated jobs, which obviously have never stopped in all time when there's been technological advancement that has not then immediately been wiped out by an increase in birth rate, which then numbs the effects of it. Because the 19th century was when we were breaking the Malthusian trap, as I don't. For all of history, there was always technological advancement, but it was immediately numbed by the increase in birth rate it would bring. 19th century is when we broke the Malthusian trap and had advancement that was not wiped out by the increase in birth rate. In fact, there was a decrease in birth rate because people no longer had to have so many babies to be part of the household workforce,
Right.
because they were surviving more, or that there were just automated technology to do the jobs that were originally done by children. Anyway,
Yes. Child labor. Yeah.
but I mean, yeah, it's just one sort of stage of many in post-industrial society, which has very similar anxieties, but they just have different cultural contexts.
So,
Like,
so is what you're saying is that this is a story about the Industrial Revolution and its consequences? Is that what you're trying to tell me?
yes, and I think we should blow up all trains. Um, well, yeah, and
Are you a Hobbit extremist?
way,
Are you
way
a,
you
are you
way,
a Hobbit identity extremist?
well, the way you were like describing everything there, I was a bit worried you were going to start talking about like Marxist alienation from labor,
Well,
like,
but so
which,
here's the thing, right? Is like I think, and we've talked about this before with in regards to Dickens.
which is not the
Dickens.
same. Like,
No,
doing,
but listen, Dickens is describing problems that he
yeah,
sees around him, and
yeah,
is in some cases, those are similar problems that Marxists were describing.
yeah. Well, yeah.
He's coming to radically different conclusions because he's not a little atheist bitch.
No, he's not.
So that's what I'm saying. But I mean,
No,
talking about alienation from work is a problem. I think that's just a human problem.
well,
It-
this is well.
yeah.
I mean, it's certainly the case that people had to work hard in pre-industrial times for it was just because it was for themselves. People just assume it's less alienating or less boring or this, that, and the other. And maybe there is a slight difference in the idea of working in an industrial context where you're doing stuff where you're the benefits of what the physical things you're doing is not quite so apparent compared to if you're just doing lots and lots of repetitive farm work. But also, Marxist alienation is also very, very, very sort of existential and cosmic. It's not just someone having bad feelings of physical feelings about it, about a job. it's literally like a kind of existential crisis that is of cosmic proportions. And but people might project that notion onto just the fact they're a bit miffed with the repetitive job they have.
Right.
Anyway,
Well, I mean, yeah,
yeah,
I think,
be careful
sorry.
with just the fact they might be alienated quotation mark from their job and assuming Marxist things about it. Anyway,
No, I mean, but work alienation can be real. I mean, that's a real
no,
problem. Yeah.
no, of course,
Lack
and
of meaningful work is not good for humans.
it's well the
It's not.
idea the idea in these more formative industrial times, particularly the 19th century, was that these jobs would then be a pathway to advancement either in the same environment or elsewhere. And often the case it was. There was lots of wage increases in the 19th century, and there was essentially no inflation.
Yeah, I was gonna say before inflation, when wage increases meant something.
People project a lot of stuff about 20th century economy, industrial economy, onto the 19th, and they assume that there was loads of inflation and that there was so many very static job opportunities and all this stagnation. They just assume all that, but no, we're in very unindustrial times, and as a result of many things, people talk about. I mean, offshoring is obviously a problem, but I see offshoring as basically, you know, there being these two protective policies in the industry before the offshoring took place that meant that it all happened so quickly, rather than it could have been there could have been solutions to it when if it was more gradual. The same with like the transition to away from coal. The fact that they nationalized the coal meant that the transition away from coal was going to be so quick, was just going to be so vast, when it inevitably we had to stop investing in coal because there were better energy sources, and
Yeah.
this is not how the 19th century was.
No.
Things would rise and fall, you know within relative to their actual use at a given time, rather than there being all this nationalization that would
Well,
slow
the
the
central planning hadn't really. I mean, it was
process.
starting, but it wasn't
Yeah,
fully in.
yeah,
Wasn't fully implemented yet, right? So
towards the end of the 19th century, that's true, but by and large, people would do things relative to what they were practically doing at a time, and then the changes could all be more gradual than all at once, which is
yeah.
obviously in the 20th century we have these absolutely unprecedented economic crashes throughout all of human history.
Well, because I mean, if you're somebody who likes Austrian economics, right?
Yes,
Because the signal, see what I did there? The signal is getting messed with by the central planners, are messing up the signal, right? About like cost benefit analysis and prices and stuff. It's getting fucked with. There's no clear signal. And so people are making wild overcorrections, swinging back and forth and doing, there's no organic adaptation day by day. What is, what allows us to do our jobs the most effectively, or the most, what's the best way of doing this? It doesn't matter because we're getting message from the higher ups that we have to XYZ. I guess we have to XYZ. Oh dear. Now we're going to deal with the problems that engendered, right? Because there was not constant back and forth. The signals sort of they're just an interruption of signal
I,
economically.
I was
So,
reading an article recently. I think I might have been by someone from The Economist. I don't know. It was a terrible article. Basically, it's this person. She was
bloody
talking.
awful.
She was talking to people, some I don't know, some sort of middle class people, and they were talking about how we've got they were like business owners or something, or they were workers, I don't know, and they were talking about the problems of inflation, or our business is struggling at the moment because of inflation. And then this stupid smug woman writing the article was like, what they're saying goes against conventional economic thinking.
Meaning
And
Keynesian thinking, which is fake and gay.
well, it's the framing of it is Keynesian. Obviously, sort of pure Keynesianism is a little is been kind of it's had things added to it. It's been
Right.
amended, but the framing of what is considered defined economics has been completely changed because of the Keynesian revolution. And now we have this point where people say the word household economics as a derogatory term. Do you know what the etymology of the word economics is?
Uh, Economia, right? In Greek.
Oikonomia, which means household management.
Yeah.
Literally, that's what it means. So for people to be using the phrase household economics as a derogatory term is just utterly ridiculous because it's a tautology in itself, you know?
In England you say ridiculous, in America we say retarded. It's just, we're saying the same thing though, right? Like, yeah, no,
Well,
I get you.
yeah,
It's ignorant. It's very ignorant.
it's
Yeah.
it is the ignorant. Well, it's just, I mean, it's like a religion. It's like a religion
Yeah, it is.
because, and if you just read about the very insane sycophancy that people had for Keynes in the 30s and the 40s, these ferocious people, to the point where Keynes himself started to get quite alienated by his own sycophants. They were so
He was
ferocious.
alienated from his labor, is what you're trying to say.
Like there's this one phrase where he said, I was at a Keynesian conference in the 40s and I was the only non-Keynesian there. Like, it's insane what Keynesians were like in the 30s and the 40s, and obviously still today, or the way that they promote conventional economic thinking, quote unquote, which has the framing of Keynesianism, but is not quite the same thing because, blah, blah, blah.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's insane. And
Well, if we can take a hard woo turn,
yes, sorry.
considering that this is a ghost story,
Go on.
and there is some sort of, I mean, I guess you could read it in a couple different ways, but I mean, why would the signalman have not jumped out of the way when when the engineer warned him if he hadn't been experiencing previous portents of him saying that? So I do really think the supernatural is real in this story, and the narrator can't really account for that, right? He's plagued by not only the death of his
Yeah,
newfound friend, but like that maybe he really was seeing something. It wasn't just a disease of the eyes or whatever he said, a disease of the optic nerve or whatever it is. Maybe he really was seeing something that tricked him into getting run down by the train.
it's
Um,
quite whimsical by which the rational thinking guy comes up with his explanations.
oh
You know,
yeah. But when the
it's
rational explanations
yeah,
are more whimsical than the guy literally seeing ghosts, I mean, what does that say too, right? Like,
well, it's so in that if it's true, I don't know how. I mean, Dickens wasn't a massive sort of religious apologist, but he wasn't an atheist. But I don't think he was like a. But he's sort of making some sort of idea that you know, uh, sort of pure logic is is not going to get you everywhere.
right.
Making the idea that there isn't just sort of pure logic and sort of material calculations and this, that, and the other.
Well,
Which to other Gothic horror stories, but I guess, and I guess it's not the main sort of theme of the story. It would be more the theme. I think the intended theme would be more about anxiety about technology and the dangers of technology.
Well, and if I can connect the supernatural, well, I mean, obviously there's a connection between the supernatural and technology in this story, which I do
Yeah,
think is great, because I think, and this is not like a precious thing that I have said. Many people have said this, many such cases, but it bears repeating that, the in literature, in genre literature, which this is, horror slash ghost stories or sci-fi. There's always like this fight about where does fantasy and horror begin, and where does is there such thing as sci-fi fantasy, and where's the distinction between that? I mean, these are all like later stage, hyper, really like recent discussions. Um,
yeah,
this is from the 1860s, back when like ghost stories are a thing that's been around ever since the dawn of time. Ghost
mm,
stories have a long and august status and tradition in your country, in England. It's one of the things I like the most about the English is there is the best ghost stories really are English.
mm,
Americans, we have slashers in the woods, we have crazy cannibal Bigfoot, but we do not have this kind of. I mean, Lovecraft tries it, but Lovecraft is referencing British stuff, right? It's like it's Poe tries it, but Poe is referencing British stuff. I mean, there's always like this. We don't have American horror is good, but it's good in a very different way.
yeah,
It doesn't have the impending doom, the regret, all the things that England is known for. Um, that's a joke, but you know what I mean. Like it,
but
you
we're in
know,
a position compared to the rest of Europe geographically,
right.
so that's the reason.
Um, and so in this story, you can see, so like there's high tech shit. This is high tech stuff, right? Very high tech. I mean, in the 1800s, to be able to do this is kind of magic. I mean,
Mm.
you can right, like like the previous century could not have done this, right? Like this is a huge advancement. Again, not just in the physical technology, but in the information technology. The telegraph people just do not. I mean, people who watch the show are intelligent, so it's not. I'm preaching to the choir, but people do not understand how magical telegraph technology actually is. It's completely magic. It really is. If you're used to people hopping on horseback and riding a horse to deliver mail, that is a lot different than sending an instant message in the truest sense of like instant message, the speed of light. You're literally using light speed to talk to someone. That is real. It is objectively magic, if you ask me. I think the earlier you are to the adaptation of it, the more magic it feels to you. So in this case,
Sure.
Dickens and his audience, that is more seen as wondrous, right? And
Yeah.
you'll see like even like early World's Fairs with like stuff the new wondrous inventions of Thomas Edison, the blah blah blah, like the wondrous miraculous. But there's like lightning bolts shooting out of his hand on like on the poster. There's all sorts of like overtly magical imagery being used, and early information technology advertisement. The way people viewed it was magic, right? There was still the kind of that it was magical. In this story, we got this guy who's he's terminally online in a way, right? He is like he really is
Yeah.
terminally online because he
Yeah.
dies from it too, right? Like he is to his end online in the sense of connected to the line, connected to the telegraph line that is very important for him to be connected to. He can't even leave. He can't like go on hikes. He has to be near. If he hears the bell ringing, he's got to run back and do something, right? He has to hit the like. He has to subscribe. He has to comment. Oh, wait, no, he has to make sure that the train's not derailing. So it's more important stuff that he's doing, but it is this perpetually online state. And in so being, he I think one of the themes, or what it seems to be like Dickens is saying, that he opens himself up to some other intelligence that is working both sort of through his senses in terms of the ghostly apparition. That's kind of more old school, like very much drawing from the long history of British folklore. I saw something walking on the moors. It was a ghostly apparition and it must mean something, right? But then also that same spirit seems to be, at least according to the signalman, working through his telegraph equipment in a way that's different than if a human is doing it. So
It
the terminally online man is experiencing spiritual interference, not just in his life, but from his machines. His information technology is opening him up to spiritual turbulence. That is, I think, some next level, if I might be so stupid, some next level shit that Dickens is talking about here. That I do think, if you think about things like mimetic infection, virality, ideas running through people online, this is a cautionary tale for us. This is over 100 years ago. There people were, at least Dickens was already kind of like saying, hey, this might be a thing that you should be worried about. We're seeing it now with like people like progressivism running rampant through people, infecting people via technology, via them being, because they're always online. I can't help but draw a connection pretty strongly to those themes. Obviously, Dickens could not have foreseen what was coming. I think he probably had an inclination of that this was going to become more, but not quite like what we have now. But I mean, for us looking back, yeah, like this warning of the look out, for God's sake, look out, right? Like that warning might also be for us because I mean, for Pete's sake, you're listening to this, dear listeners, online, and me and Fred are recording this across oceans, thousands of miles. I mean, this is all, we are
not
in this ghosts. We are living in this ghost. This ghost story is our lives right now. Hopefully, we're not going to be run down by trains, but it's
it's
there. This is
we've,
us.
we've literally made real the the story of Saint Clair, the patron saint of made patron saint of television, because she prayed to God that to be able to see a service taking place that she was too ill to attend, and God sent her a vision. We're literally creating the story of Saint Clair, um, doing a church service over Zoom call. That must be quite unsettling for some people, especially in the era of COVID when
Well,
when
yeah.
video conferencing
And
big
if I
thing.
may, I have a theory I've been working on. I think it works tangent or thematically here if I can drop it on you and the dear listeners. Talking about miracles associated with saints.
Mm,
So again, whether or not you believe in this or not, I think it works in terms of the ideas. So
mm,
Padre Pio, right, aka Shia LaBeouf, Padre Pio is one of many saints who's purported to be have been able to bilocate, meaning be appear in more than one place at the same time, which,
mm,
according to a strictly materialist understanding of time space, is impossible.
mm,
Although if you get into quantum stuff, it can get kind of like that's already basically magic at that point. But if you're like a shitlib, materialist atheist, that's impossible. But it's something that saints, various saints for the history of throughout the history of Christian hagiography have been attributed to them. I saw him here. Well, at the same time, I was 100 miles away in whatever village. Okay, apparently they were somehow in both places at the same time. Padre Pio is a modern saint in the Catholic Church that had this is reported to have been able to or report this miracle reportedly happened, and I can't speak to that. I'm not Roman Catholic, so I mean I think it's a cool idea. I'm not going to say it didn't happen, right? I don't know, but this is something that reading just a little bit about Padre Pio, and I still do need to see the Shia LaBeouf movie. It's apparently pretty good, but um, got me thinking that like, oh, so like Padre Pio is this like very holy man, and so God kind of like grants him this ability to be in two places at once, because he's so holy. We spiritually, in the sense of mind projection, can be in two, three, four, five, multiple places at once via technology, right? Via
mm.
information technology, we can be in two places at once. Right now, in a sense, we are in two places at once, and that you're seeing me in England and I'm seeing you in the Great Pacific Northwest. And we're there, but we're also here, and you're also with me, and I'm also with you. We have technology allows us to do this. It's a kind of astral projection. It really is.
It's
But let me finish.
good.
Unlike Padre Pio, we have not we have not become a holy in order to get this. It's just
Things
been given to us, right? We've just taken it, and so we
and
don't have the virtue associated with doing that, right? We just kind of get it, and we can use it for whatever we want.
things that
So
would get us 100 years ago, but now it's boring, isn't it?
yeah,
Yeah. No, people. Yeah, people aren't given the kind of sort of contextual framework to really understand the wonders of technology, and yeah, back a bit to the point with the segment, the idea that I think the word that I was looking for when in your expression was that his job is sort of making him vulnerable to it, or is
the other world.
making his mind vulnerable to some sort of kind of fundamental nature of the world does that finds his job too unnatural to be in this very weird place where he's so lonely, but he's also got a very important job, blah blah blah. It's as if there's some sort of natural force that's compensating for the very unnatural thing of the very natural state that his job is, that it just bleeds through and that he sees these apparitions, you know.
Yeah.
So it's like the universe compensating for something, and maybe that's what Dickens thought. They thought this job was such a existentially unnatural thing to do. But I I think that would sort of lend itself back to the idea of how you know this was in a sort of, I think this was in the tail end of the Romantic era where everyone was starting to look back, sort of, in my opinion, propagandize about pre-industrial times and how they were all sunshine and daisies. And
Right.
I think
Which is clearly not the case, right?
yeah,
But
industrial,
yeah,
I don't industrialized people who are of industrial society, they often think they know everything, and then they also think they know what rural farming life is like. Whether it's today, they make all these sort of pronouncements about what it's like to farm and the dangers of farming. Similarly, they also make all these assumptions about what life was like when majority of the population was subsistence farming. It was tough, and whether we could say the alienation or the just the repetitiveness, whatever people felt from that sort of work compared to industrial work, is better or worse. Obviously, it was a different nature, of course it was, but whether it's better or worse is, you know, I mean, the romanticists would, there's well, loads of people would say it's damningly worse. The industrial society is worse, which, you know, I think that's another debate to be had. But yeah, it's, I think that's what Dickens is trying to, I think Dickens was a bit of a romanticist, you know, I mean, you know, there's lots of damning things he has to say about modern times and commerce and blah blah blah. You know, stuff. Some of it which I think was misplaced, but
Yeah.
yeah, yeah,
Well, I think that ties this story in with another one of my favorite great British and I can say British because it was still part of England at that point. It was part of Great Britain, even though it was Irish. Dracula by Bram Stoker is very clearly a story of, you know, technology versus monsters of the past.
yeah,
Um, and although in that case it's more of like we're going to use technology to defeat Dracula and his various minions. This is more of like that technology that you think heralds this new world might actually just connect you more strongly to the specters of the past. Because like I said, the idea of a ghastly apparition that presages death is so, I do believe in tradition. Like you, there was everywhere in the British Isles, you could find like versions of it. It's everywhere in Europe. Like
mm,
it's a pretty widespread folkloric trope. It's
yeah,
this kind of spirit is like it's everywhere. Every culture at one point in time or another, whether they believe it now or not, it's like completely inconsequential. At one point in time or another, every single, I'm making this statement because I'm fairly confident you can back it up. Every single human culture has had ghosts. Every single human culture has had a ghost that warns you about something. Now, whether you can change it or not is the other question.
yeah,
Oftentimes you can't. You're fucked. But that's a thing that humans have always had.
mm,
It's just back to the very first, really, like back to humans dropping out of trees and being on the ground. Like that is once you realize you're going to die, once you discover mortality, you have ghosts now, you have spirits warning you about your mortality. That's just is like the most ancient shit ever. So and I mean Dickens would have probably said that in a less ridiculous way, but I mean I think he knew that, right? Like he's bringing the specters back. He's making specters great again. He's like, hey, but they're still here, and maybe you know maybe that's something that has to do with the opening of I'm gonna say it right. Ready? Because I got in trouble for this before with you. An opening of a tube. Did I say it right? A tube. The opening of a tube into the ground is interesting because it's very, if I can also throw out a $20 word, a 20 quid word, it's very chthonic. It's very underworldly. It is
yeah.
literally going, it's a shortcut through the ground. You're like, that's where the dead people are. That's where the spirits of the dead are, that you're going through there. And so
Just
you open that up,
yeah,
literally open it
yeah,
up. So
just no, yeah. I think well that might also lean into the kind of romanticist style that the whole or the sort of romanticist custom, artistic custom of the time. And yes, no, there's definitely something about train tunnels that all people just still find kind of, you know, they're sort of taken with them, aren't they? You know,
have you
they
been in a train tunnel before? Like not on a train?
not oh not on a train. Oh,
Like have you walked through a train tunnel?
I've not, but I have trespassed on railway lines before, which I've done because it's extremely dangerous because
Aren't
the
they
rail
electrified?
not only are they electrified, but the third rail on the ground is the electric one. They're not above. So if I had I didn't know this at the time. If I had accidentally touched them, I would have died instantly. And I was not very happy to find that out when I did find that out, as in that I was in danger of that. Don't be wrong. I had some great fun trespassing on train lines. It was so fun. We did it with a couple of school friends, and you know, we there was one time we did get caught, and driver, well, as in the driver opened the window and said, "Oh, get off the railway, it's dangerous." But we didn't. We should have had £1,000 fine. But we didn't. Um, and that was really fun, but it was extremely dangerous because the third rail was on the line. I've not been in a tunnel, no, but we were under this. We went under this road bridge that goes over a railway line. A railway. There was this railway line that was in a ditch, so like the one that's portrayed in the book. And there's a road a vehicle road that goes above it, and we would sometimes go under this bridge, and then sometimes a train would go past, and we would be hiding behind one of the pillars or something. And it was so cool. It was so fun, exceptionally dangerous. But and then sometimes we'd see badgers because that's the only that was these sort of banks were the only places that badgers didn't feel shy enough or felt not shy enough to sort of come out because obviously badgers are quite shy. This would be the only place where we'd sort of ever see badgers.
European badgers are nice. American badgers are assholes.
Oh, yeah, yeah. I remember seeing an episode of The Simpsons where there was
Yeah, your American badgers are mean.
there's like oh, there's a badger in Santa's Little Helper's kennel. I was like, what the badger? The badger vicious. Like, what's
They're
this about?
different subspecies out
Um,
here. Yeah, they're more aggressive.
no, yeah, we would see badgers on these trains because these a lot of these train banks, these banks that would go down to train lines would be very real wilded. They weren't
Yeah,
really like up. They would just have all these weeds growing, and then there'd probably be like badger sets and stuff.
yeah.
Uh, but
Well,
yeah, I've
but
been
the reason I ask is because if
I
you actually, so there's a I've
reminisce
told,
about that.
yeah, I've told this story I think on Caleb, who's a friend of the show, his Thomas review show before on the live stream, but I'll share it again here because it does have to do with trains and tunnels. So there's a
Yeah,
train tunnel, an abandoned train tunnel, uh, well, out in the Cascade Mountains, just like an hour east of Seattle, Iron Horse State Park, if anyone's interested. They've turned it into a like walking and bike path, but it is a 2 mile long train tunnel. And so it's 2 miles long. So this means that you are pretty quickly plunged into absolute darkness. However, it takes you 2 miles to get through to the other side. You will literally pass through a gigantic mountain, basically. Well, not gigantic mountain, but through a smaller foothill of a mountain. You're under like, I don't know how many feet of rock. Um, the walls are oozy and wet, so that was very like this is very accurate of what a train tunnel looks like. Any sort of tunnel in a mountainy area looks like, or any or hill, because it's cold, and so the water condenses on right. It's colder if you have humidity in the air, it condenses on the side. It's very oozy wet. It is so a 2 mile train tunnel, which is not what I think Dickens is referencing here, but a 2 mile train tunnel means you don't see the light on either ends at some point for like a chunk of your journey through that. And the way the park is set up, you park your car at one end, you have to commit to two both ways, down and back. So you're walking 4 miles in darkness. Um, I will tell you, it is a great experience. I did it with my wife and my dog. Halfway through the first time through, we were kind of freaking out, but knew that we had to just go. We were committed to do down and back and not turn around and puss out. And we took a break out in the sunshine on the other hand, ate a snack, and then head back because there's something you think it'll be fine. I mean, it is fine, and you have to have a headlamp to make sure you're not tripping and falling on something in there. But it is absolutely it's the most deepest part of your like evolutionary fears. You think you're scared of the dark as a kid?
mm,
Nothing like this. This is not it's nothing like this. You have to experience it. I do think it's a good experience if you like being scared. It's better than any sort of, haunted house I visited here in the US. This thing was legitimately freaking me out. I think I said afterwards of the experience, if there was a place where a vampire would hang out and roost in the daytime, it would be there because it's like deep black darkness in a way that it is so. I mean, you're just going straight, but because you're going straight into a hill, you're going underground. And I mean, it is the most an incredibly chthonic experience, and you feel like you're going to die. I mean, and it's easy to imagine of what's there beyond the range of my headlamp. And you don't really want to start thinking down those thought ways because pretty soon you'll start freaking yourself out even worse. But you're like, there could be anything. You would not see it until you're right up on it. So, I mean, so maybe that's from me having already done that before I ever even read this story. I was like, oh yeah, it's a totally buy it. Specters of death and destruction and a train tunnel. Hell yeah. Like, I basically convinced myself that was happening when I went both ways through that fucking train tunnel. So if you ever get the chance to do it safely, again, this is do it because it's absolutely unnerving if you like being unnerved, and I guess I do. So yeah,
I've just remembered that I have done something like that, just not quite as
I mean, mine shafts will do the same thing for you.
oh,
Mine shafts, right?
I was in Ramsgate, which is a town on the coast in Kent, on quite a far east side of it, southeast side of England, and there was a tunnel that had been used for trains in the war, it was connected to the war. I don't, maybe it was passenger, just civilian trains as well, but it's been disused. It was this long tunnel, and I went there with my family, and it wasn't very claustrophobic. It was quite sort of large, but it had been the trains were no longer there, and now there was a sort of war museum sort of inside, and there was light and everything. But we went on this very hot day. It's like mid 20, 30 degrees Celsius, hot by our standards. And then we went into this tunnel, and we went like 100, 200 meters from the entrance, and it was freezing cold. And having us just been outside, and usually, when it's hot outside and you go indoor somewhere, you expect it to be insulated in some way. But no, it's just freezing cold. And it's I imagine it's similar to your experience, but the contrast there of the temperatures, and the fact that you usually expect things to be insulated in some way, and when you're indoors, and just, there's something chilling about it, obviously, literally, but
literally,
yeah. And it wasn't claustrophobic, so it wasn't necessarily scary, but just the fact it was I've been very claustrophobic about kind of confined spaces, or I'm not a huge fan of that, to be honest. But yeah, something like that, just to experience it, was I've never done a sort of long train bridge yet. I should do at some point. I went to lots of bunkers when I was in Albania, which is not quite the same, but it was interesting how all these bunkers that were built in Albania in the communist rule, because they were so terrified of being invaded again or something.
Well, if you ever make it out here, I'll take you to this. You got to experience it. It's 2 miles each way.
Sure, man. Yeah.
4 miles of darkness. Yeah, it's absolutely cool, I think. But anyhow, yeah. So yeah, maybe some of the dear listeners have also done this. Yeah, being in tunnels is there's something really like, you can be the most rational, quote unquote, materialist person, and then you go into a tunnel and you're like, wait, like just it's yeah, it brings up the stuff from beneath that we like to push down, right? That we like to pretend we don't believe anymore. Um, and I think that Dickens is
Because
playing with this, right?
our
Quite.
minds have limited capacity, because it's also a story just about the limits of a purely logical, um, sort of purely logical view of the world. That because our minds have limited capacity, we can't simply just say, due to logic, everything's all right. I mean, obviously, we might have all the, I don't know, the data of the propensity for landslides or earthquakes in a given place where there's a tunnel or anything, but there's always unknowable things that, like, this is something I've been thinking about recently, because my job is in forecasting. I work in commercial forecasting, but then, like, nothing is predictable.
You're
Nothing.
you're forecasting the runes. As a bad MR James pun. Anyhow, continue.
It's just sort of market stuff.
Which
Nothing
is
is.
just, by the way, that's just divination, but continue.
No, yes, exactly. Nothing is predictable at all. But the problem comes with people pretending that they can predict things, and being given prestige and power for it. But nothing is predictable. No precise outcomes are predictable. And it's something that does not get acknowledged. And it is just a form of divination, isn't it? It's ridiculous.
Pretty much. I mean, we're just astral projecting right now, as I said, right? Like, the technology gives us access to particularly information technology. It's a spiritual kind of technology, but we don't have the virtue of having, like, become holy people, right? We just get it.
We haven't replaced God. We've just mastered the natural resources as best we can, and obviously it's really impressive, and we should be thanked for it, the English. But yes, it's just ridiculous what people take for granted or just assume wrongly, but because it mostly comes down to sort of philosophical assumptions rather than just, they just take all this shit for granted, or the logic behind it, and it's just really annoying.
Well, because there's always spiritual assumptions behind everything, right?
Yeah, you're being too axiomic, of course.
Axiomatic. Yeah, I'm being too axiomatic. Uh-oh.
Axiomatic.
You're being too axiomatic.
I just realized the word axiomatic sounds ridiculous compared to the word axiomic, which is like a real word, isn't it?
You say
Axiom,
axiomatic, I think,
a machine you've invented or something.
you
Yeah,
say aluminium. Be quiet. Anyhow, you don't know what words are. You say disorientated, so be quiet. You don't know what words are.
not quite real because it doesn't end in ium, which all the other metals do.
Well, whatever, because we invented it, so you can just get wrecked.
You didn't.
Um,
Americium, that's all you have. which is an artificial metal, I think. It's only a theoretical metal.
well, pretty soon we're gonna have magnesite. So, anyhow,
Got manganese and magnesium.
yeah.
Anyway,
Cool. Well, Fred, thank you so much for coming on. I know that there's a time difference, and I appreciate that we are actually literally talking across time right now and space. I appreciate you taking the time to do that.
oh no,
Um,
I'm telling you how the future is.
yeah.
There's been a big asteroid collision. Don't go into work today. Tomorrow.
On Sunday?
There's
Okay.
been an. It's Saturday. You're not going to church today. You give me one reason. It's Saturday.
All right. Yeah, thank you for
Sorry.
You're good. Thank you, man. What are they putting in the water over there? Thank you for coming on and talking about this. And yeah, let's have you back on. There's like you said, there's many a good, particularly British ghost story out there, and 'tis the season for that. And because the British ghost stories, we really have up until Christmas to get to some of them, right? Because Christmas is your spooky season. So your spooky season is later than ours. So
Tales of the glories of Christmas is far long ago.
yeah. It's
Yeah, I
true.
think the gimmick line, but it turns out it's not.
Nope.
From that
Yeah.
one Williams ditty.
Yeah. Anyway.
Yes, no, either we can, well, I mean, we can do Christmas Carol when the time comes and have a think about something in the meantime. Yeah, that'd be cool.
There's other even Dickens ghost stories having to do with Christmas. Was the goblins who stole Christmas or something like that? There's a I'm gonna but that's a butchering the title. There's a ghost story about Christmas that Dickens wrote and it has to do with goblins. So we could do that one.
Anyway, so also just for you're going to go. I told you to go and watch Beetlejuice, and you are going to go and watch that today. I order you
That's the
to,
goal. Yeah.
and also, I've decided to watch. I was thinking of something I was going to watch tonight. I'm going to watch The Thing again
The
because
Thing is a great one.
I stumbled across a YouTube video the other day where they were talking about it, was reviewing it. I think it was on Red Letter Media. I love Red Letter Media. They're great.
It's a good one. Yeah.
So I might just watch it
The Thing
again.
is such a good film. I recommend it wholeheartedly.
I love The Thing. It's
To
so
connect
good.
back to spooky movies in general, I don't know which order these will come out. They'll probably come out somewhat close to each other. I recently recorded a review discussion basically with Bulge from Thomas Media about 1998 Fallen with Denzel Washington, and it gets into kind of similar discussions of virality and the how ideas pass between people, and what that does when to how ideas can control you. I recommend that one to you as well,
Is,
there, Fred.
is that does that have Dakota Fanning in it?
No,
No,
you're thinking of Man on Fire.
I'm thinking of Man on Fire. Sorry.
Yes. No, it's okay. That's also a good one.
I do like Denzel Washington. I was
Denzel,
just
you should check out Fallen.
okay. Yeah.
John Goodman.
Well, I'm less impressed with him these days doing these roles in films where they're revising the characters with
I
non
liked Macbeth.
casting.
I liked Macbeth with him.
Macbeth, you can. There's already an existing tradition of doing unconventional settings for Macbeth, and obviously Shakespeare stories are supposed to lend themselves to kind of more fundamental truths that cross cultural boundaries. So that's not what I'm talking about more, but well, I'm talking about this new portrayal of Hannibal. He's supposed,
Oh, yeah.
and his thing in Gladiator 2 is well, it says he's a former slave, so like okay, even though I think that film was probably going to be a bit crap. Anyway,
But so
but
anyway, you should
in
check
general,
out Fallen. It's a
check out.
really good movie.
Like mostly, I do mostly like Denzel Washington.
Yeah,
Yeah,
check out Fallen. Cool. And with that, I think we'll let everyone go on with the rest of their weekend or week, whatever they watch this, whenever this drops. But yeah, we'll have you back on. We'll do more spooky stuff. And yeah, until then, everyone, take it easy, have a good one, and see you hopefully shortly.
thanks very much.